and dietary behaviors in children. And again, with respect to limited time that I have with you today, I want to share the work of a young Canadian investigator, Dr. Ian Jansen, and basically what he has done is use the kind of data that you would expect him to use as an epidemiologist to make the following observations. And the first couple are of no surprise to you. If you look at the odds ratio for overweight, these are all the countries. He did 34 countries, a very thorough analysis. Canada is right here. And basically what this says, if you're a school-age child, the more you are physically active, the less the chance of you being overweight or obese. So that makes some sense to you. And in fact, considering other aspects of the behavior, and our chair, Dr. Colley, would be well aware of this type of work, if you look at TV viewing time as another behavior, say the other side of the coin of physical activity, in all of these countries, pretty much the case is clear. Increased TV viewing time is also associated with increase in obesity. So what about nutrition? Well, remarkably enough, if you look at soft drink intake, for example, in these same school-aged children, you see very clearly no pattern here. There's no clear indication, at least in this study, that soft drink consumption has something to do with overweight and obesity. And in fact, somewhat paradoxically and very difficult to explain, if you look at sweet intake in this same group, the higher the sweet intake, the lower the obesity. So I think when you take that together, it's fairly profound, and the authors conclude saying that if you're thinking of the factors that are most responsible for the increase in obesity in children, it's about physical activity and decreasing television viewing time. Now, I spared no expense or time and sought the primary author of this paper out for a personal communication, and I asked him what he thought about this, and he very clearly said, well, exercise is good, diet not so much. I may have paraphrased him just a little bit, but that's the gist of what I say. So with respect to the first question, if we look at the prevention, or what are factors, feet versus fork, that explain the profound increase in obesity that we see in adults and children, Madam Chair, I think it's very clear. It's about the feet, not the fork, I think is clearly what the data would say. Well, in the time that I have, I thought I'd look at two questions. As I said, here's my second question. If physical activity is responsible for the increase in obesity, well then where's the evidence to suggest that if we increase physical activity that we will decrease obesity? One following the other, so it made sense for me to consider this question, and so I did. Now I need to be fair to my colleague, and I need to acknowledge that there have been several meta-analyses that looked at this, and here you have the loss in kilograms of either in the green weight or in red the fat loss, and you can very clearly see here that at first glance I look like I'm in big trouble here, because if you if you calorically restrict, you get substantial weight and fat loss, and if you exercise, so here there's no exercise, here there's no diet, you get clearly a very significant reduction by comparison, or a lower reduction in adiposity by compared to diet. And sure enough, the next year, a group of outstanding colleagues reviewed the literature and made a similar observation. Said that if you look at aerobic exercise, and again, this is without the benefit of caloric restriction, as well as you can do that in a reviewed literature, you get very modest exercise-induced weight loss and very modest exercise reduction in abdominal fat. So at first glance, it seemed that there's just something magical going on. You calorically restrict and you lose weight, but you exercise all day and just somehow the body just doesn't get it, doesn't understand, the negative energy balance doesn't matter. Well, this didn't make sense to us a few years ago, so we started to investigate this a little bit in our own group. And what we observed is this. True enough, two very important points. If you look at the energy expenditure in kilocalories per week, all right, and this is, you can derive that from the literature. These are studies in which we could derive that. Now, this is exercise-induced negative energy balance. There's no caloric restriction here. And if you look at the reduction in kilograms in both weight and or fat, you very clearly see a dose response here. Now, because most of the studies had very low negative energy balance, the weight loss was very low. So what I was saying is when we were comparing nutrition or caloric negative energy balance to the increase in physical activity, we didn't have a level playing field. We had a 400 or 500 kilocalorie a day caloric restriction and maybe 100 calories from exercise, and then we say, well, look, see, exercise doesn't work. Well, we had a slightly different view. What we said was that if you calculated the expected weight loss, you got exactly what the program prescribed. So basically the problem was in prior reviews was they just didn't observe the literature or consider the literature the same way we did. What we asked then was this question. What if you take a person and you equilibrate the negative energy balance from diet-induced or the increase in physical activity energy expenditure from exercise? This is essentially the question that Yoni and I have to debate today. Looked at it pictorially, it would be basically this. If we have a 5 to 10% weight loss just through caloric restriction compared to 5 to 10% just to exercise, here's our question of the day. This is what we want to know. Are there treatment differences? Now we've leveled the playing field, and now we can analyze the question. Before, we had apples and oranges. Excuse the pun. All right. The second thing we have to do is look at outcomes. What are our desired outcomes? How are we going to determine treatment difference? Well, I submit to you that if we're going to compare the two, then we're going to look to see what happens to total fat. We're going to look to see what happens to abdominal subcutaneous visceral fat waist circumference. Lean tissue is very important tissue to conserve in terms of obesity management. We certainly want to improve functional capacity or cardiorespiratory fitness. This has to be a product of any treatment strategy to reduce obesity. And of course, then we want to reduce the comorbidities. And I'm just going to pick on one because I don't have much time. That's insulin resistance. So these studies have to be performed, and performed they were. And now we have diet-induced weight loss compared to exercise-induced weight loss, and we calibrate the negative energy balance induced by both of these. And then we have another group that exercises as much as this group, but we refeed this group. And as I always like to say, this is not a very popular group in our studies at all, but it does provide some insight for us. And they did all the kinds of things that you would expect them to do in this type of study. So now we have a level playing field. The first observation we see is now, well, if you equate the negative energy balance, you get the same weight loss. That was not what the meta-analyses were saying. They were saying that this exercise should have been up here, right? But all we did now is we prescribed the same basic treatment for both groups. And what do we see? Well, the first observation is that we have an improvement in cardiorespiratory fitness. And as you know, if you listen to me or any other exercise scientist, and most of you in here know, that's a primary outcome. I know they're engaged in the management of obesity, but now you've improved their functional capacity. So it's a no-brainer to say if you're not physically active, if you diet, there's no improvement in cardiorespiratory fitness. If you do exercise, there is, and that's important. Because as Dr. Blair has said for many years, even if you maintain these two groups have the same